Come along with me on what I intended to be a fly fishing road trip along the Gulf Coast, Panhandle, Florida. I started my journey flying into Pensacola and out of Tampa. I spent 3 days in Pensacola, about 2 days driving, and another 3 days in St. Petersburg. My intention was to make stops along the way to fly fish as often as possible. Unfortunately, the weather took a turn for the worse, and with 40-mile-per-hour winds, I wasn't going to be doing a whole lot of fishing on my road trip. So I decided to hire a guide in Pensacola. And I am proud and grateful to say that I caught a redfish of a lifetime. And this obviously made up for the lack of fishing during the road trip. So about this redfish, I'd researched a handful of guides in Pensacola and ended up going with Captain Dan's story. And on the day of our trip, we headed out into this super dense fog. You could barely see more than 50 feet in front of you, and it was a little daunting, but it was so eerie that it actually just kept me calm. When we got close to where we were going to fish, it was still pretty foggy, so Captain Dan got to work on reminding me how to cast when fly fishing in the ocean. I've done it before, but I'm pretty novice. About 45 minutes into our trip, I get lucky, and all I can think about is how I need to land this fish and get it in the boat. So I kept the line tight, reeled it in, let him fight for what felt like forever, but we did it, and I couldn't have been happier. I guess you could say I spent the remainder of the day practicing my casting. We didn't catch another fish, but the views were gorgeous. Although everything else pretty much paled in comparison, let me talk about the highlights of the rest of my trip. My entire trip, I ate such good seafood. Everything from oysters to crab to sushi. It was all delicious. Apparently February is prime time for oysters, so definitely check it out if you're there during that time of year. Here's a list of the restaurants I visited and would definitely recommend. At Pensacola Beach, we enjoyed flounders, drift, the wharf, and crabs, and badass coffee. Outside of town, we enjoyed brunch at Another Broken Egg and Chirps. We had a blast at Wild Greg's Saloon and Seville Quarter. Definitely recommend visiting either of these bars if you're looking for good times, good music, line dancing, regular dancing, or karaoke. In St. Petersburg, my dining recommendations include Paul's Landing for some dockside dining, Wooden Rooster for amazing crepes. Mine had scrambled eggs and avocado in it. It was so good. Perry's on the Pier has good food and coffee, and I also ventured out to Treasure Island and would highly recommend VIP Mexican for delicious tacos and Ricky T's for good music. Food is always a major part of my vacations, but during the actual road trip, I pretty much packed meals. So let me tell you about my must-see places along the way. I mentioned I drove from Pensacola to St. Petersburg. We stayed at a hotel on Pensacola Beach and definitely recommend visiting Santa Rosa Island and Destin. These are top places I've been before and loved them. And since I ended up leaving Pensacola late, I stayed in PCB, Panama City Beach, which I was excited to visit, being that I'm a pretty big country music lover. I enjoyed some mahi tacos at Sharky's and listened to Clay Musgraves, who was the entertainment for the night, playing a variety of music. The next day was my main travel day. The route I took consisted mostly of Highway 98 to 589. The first fishing stops I made were St. Andrews Bay and Apalachicola Bay, where the views were beautiful but the winds were strong. Since I wasn't fishing, I took a detour up to Wakula Springs. It's known as the world's largest and deepest freshwater spring, and though I didn't see any, you can often spot manatees there. I was only stopped for a quick lunch break and did decide to jump off the 22-foot platform, which I very much enjoyed the 70-degree water since the temperatures outside were 50 degrees and windy. The other prime fishing spots included Port St. Joe, East Point, Kings Bay, and Crystal River. I arrived at Crystal River at sunset, and it was absolutely breathtaking. Now, during my stay at St. Petersburg, I soaked up the luxury of the Vinoy Resort. I didn't get the opportunity to eat at Elliott Astor, though I'd always heard great things. So my other major recommendations for the area, besides the food that I already listed, would be to hop on the Looper. It's a free trolley featuring 20 stops where you can get off and see whatever sites you might be interested in, whether it's art, museums, scenic walks, and you can hop back on. The trolley is rotating around every 15 to 20 minutes. I highly recommend, as it's a great way to see a lot of different things in a short amount of time. The Vignoy Resort has so many perks. There are gorgeous views. It's right on a marina. There's a fitness center where you could rent an e-bike and see anything that you might have missed during your travels on the Looper. I think it's safe to say my trip was a huge success. I hope you enjoyed watching and gained some insight for any trips you might make down that way someday.